Hello everyone, how's it going? It's Mostrino here. Since I've already kind of introduced the whole series and what it's going to be about in the first video, I'm just going to kind of skip all of that intro stuff for now. And again, if you haven't seen the first video, go ahead and watch that one. But I'm just going to get right into the tips for this one. Today, as you can probably tell by the title, we're talking about transition techniques. So the main thing that I want to make as a point really clearly before I go into more of the technical stuff is that one of the biggest things that's going to impact your ability to do some of these transitions is going to be your track selection. You know, making sure that you pick tracks that you know can transition well together, whether it's going to be, you know, in terms of key and BPM, or even just making sure that it has similar moods and energy, right? Because if you're picking, you know, a track that's really dark versus a track that's really uplifting, versus two tracks that are really dark, you might be able to pull off the dark to uplifting transition, but it's going to be way easier to pull off a transition when both of the tracks are dark, right? So keeping track selection in mind is going to be very important. You know, sometimes you might want to challenge yourself and transition between two tracks that might not have seemed like they could transition well together. But other times, you know, maybe you just want to go for a smooth transition. And in that regard, being smart about your track selection and picking tracks that you know fit together is going to help save you a lot of time and a lot of frustration. So I wanted to make that very clear right off the bat before I go into some of these other transition techniques that I've been wanting to talk about here. So the first point that I'm going to talk about is key transitions. The first thing that I should say with this is that in terms of your key transitions and transitioning between tracks, you're almost always going to get the best result when both of the tracks are in the same key. But I would imagine that, you know, sometimes you don't want to constrain your mixes to having to have every single track in the same key. You know, sometimes you want to be able to have the ability to change keys if you'd like. And for that, the circle of fifths, I think, will most of the time be the best option. I've seen people use pitch slides to change key, which I used to do a lot myself. This can work in certain circumstances, but in my experience, using the circle of fifths has been the best option from the judge's perspective. It tends to go over well the best with the judges as compared to pitch slides, for example, which, you know, unless you're really executing it well and it really works in the transition, usually the judges would far prefer you to use a circle of fifths for the transition, and you'll be much better off doing so. So that's what I'm going to talk about right now. So if you're unfamiliar with the circle of fifths, I've got like the most broken setup here where I'm just having a Z-Game editor visualizer so that I can actually show the circle of fifths in FL. So here it is, and I know that this probably looks pretty intimidating at first if you're unfamiliar with music theory, but I can tell you, you don't need to know anything about music theory to be able to use this circle of fifths. So the first thing that I want you to do is all of these like clef things on the ends, just ignore all of those. Don't even look at those. I'll only look at this stuff in the circle. So the first thing that I'll go over really quickly is what's the difference between the outer and inner ring of the circle, right? This guy versus this guy. This is just major and this is minor. So G major uses the same notes as E minor. F major uses the same notes as D minor. I talked about this in the first video, and I showed using the chart on the catalog to do it, but this circle of fifths will show you that as well in terms of major and minor. You can see their equivalents really quickly here. It's just that the catalog one includes some other scales as well, but since we haven't gone over those, you know, just major and minor is all you really need to know for this one. And the other thing that might throw you off here is, you know, what are these guys here with the B's? Well, those B things are flats. This is B flat minor, E flat minor, G flat minor, D flat minor. But the reason why I really like this picture in particular, and I'm going to link this one in the description, is because for all of the flat ones, you can just ignore those too because it tells you their sharp counterparts as well. Basically, E flat minor is the same as D sharp minor, but you don't even have to remember that because it says D sharp minor in the same thing. So basically, mentally block all of this stuff outside of the circle, and you can mentally block all of this flat stuff as well because it's going to tell you the sharp counterparts. So how do you actually read this circle aside from knowing that this is major and this is minor? Basically, the only thing that you need to know in terms of this circle of fifths is, let's say we're in F sharp minor, just continuing the ascend example from last time. If you want to change to a different key, basically what this circle of fifths is telling you is that the best key to change to is either B minor or C sharp minor. For any given key, your best options are going to be the ones that are right next to it. So you don't even need to know any music theory for this. Just find which key you're in, and then just look what is right next to it, and those are the ones that you're going to want to switch to. And the reason why this works is because if I'm using F sharp minor as an example, again, we talked about in the first video that a key just tells you what notes a track uses, and the key of F sharp minor uses all but one of the same notes as B minor and all but one of the same notes as C sharp minor. So if you're not changing for it to be in the same key, then the best that you can get is going to one of these two keys, because they're going to have all of the same notes except for one. And you might be thinking, well, is it possible for the one note that they don't have in common to cause some problems with the transition? Yeah, it's possible. But luckily, there are easy fixes to that, in the sense where if you're not really good with hearing when things are out of key, then if you're just unsure about a transition, you can just send it out, ask some people for feedback, and maybe they'll be able to help you out with that. But again, if you're wanting to change key, your best bet, pull this up, maybe have it bookmarked or something, and then just go to the one that's right next to the key that you're in. And that will be the best key to transition to if you're going to want to change key. And I have my KOC mix as an example of this, because since the KOC mix was an hour-long mix, I wouldn't want to be using the exact same key all the time, because that would be very limiting in terms of track selection, and it wouldn't allow me to have nearly as much variety as I wanted. So you're going to see right here how I used the circle of fifths and kind of went around it, as I'm going to use this as an example of using the circle of fifths so that you can change key and be able to move around with key, but still have all of those transitions as clean as possible. So for this, we start out with form, which is in D sharp minor. So the first key transition starts around here. See, we moved from here to here, and it was, I would say, a pretty smooth key transition. You didn't hear any dissonance because we're using the circle of fifths and these keys are so close to each other. Then we have our next key transition, which starts around here. And here we move from G sharp minor to C sharp minor. And then our next key transition starts here. We're still in C sharp minor. And then we move to F sharp minor. So far we've kind of traveled this way through the circle. So where do you think we'll go next? And if you guessed B minor, you're definitely right, because here we're still in F sharp minor. But here we transition to B minor. So again, just trying to keep those key transitions as smooth as possible by going across the circle of fifths. Where you think you're going to go next? Well, if you guessed E minor, you're absolutely right. Where do you think we're going next? If you guessed A minor, you would be right. And again, we change key pretty smoothly. Where do you think we're going next? That's right, D minor. So right here we're in A minor, and then we're going to transition into Victory, which is in D minor next. And then again, where do you think we're going next? Yep, we're gonna head from D minor to G minor. We're going all around this circle basically. So here we've got this mashup in D minor, and then we head into another mashup in G minor. Again, we've gone all the way through to G minor. Where do you think we're heading next? I'm glad that this exists in the mix, because there is one and only one transition that does not abide by the circle of fifths. We do not go from G minor to C minor. We actually go from G minor to F minor, skipping through C minor. And the reason why I'm glad that this is here is just to kind of show as an example, your circle of fifths is going to be the best bet for the majority of key transitions, but there are always going to be examples that are exceptions, just like the one that I'm about to play. And also in my 2021 Mix Contest submission, I went from D minor to E minor with the Particles to Tombstone X Us transition. And I never had anyone, not even the perfect pitch people, comment on any key problems with that one. I was able to kind of skip this A minor here, and nobody had a problem with it. So again, there are always going to be exceptions to, using the circle of fifths. There are going to be ways that you can get away with not using it, which I'm glad that I can showcase one in here. But if you're not super sure what you're doing, it kind of goes back to the saying of you've got to learn the rules before you can break them. I think that it's a very good saying in the sense where if you're not sure, either just staying in the same key or using the circle of fifths is going to be your best bet. But once you get a little bit more comfortable, you can try more things out and don't necessarily feel like you have to go with the circle of fifths, rather that it's probably going to be the safest option. And another thing that I should note is that in this mix, I went through the circle this way, but it's also perfectly fine to go through the circle this way. The order doesn't matter as long as you're going to a key next to it. In fact, if I wanted, I could go like here and then backwards. There are some different combinations that you can do. Just stick to the key that's right next to the one that you're in. Doesn't matter if it's to the left of it or to the right of it. So anyways, like I said, from here we go from G minor to F minor, and you can hear how I did that. And I'll explain really briefly how I did it, because what I did is I had slowed down the mashup from like 172 to 150. So by slowing it down and pitching it down simultaneously, it made the key transition feel a bit more natural than if I had just gone from G minor to F minor while staying at the same BPM. So here is that transition. But then we go back to running by the rules of the circle of fifths. We move from F minor to C minor, actually. So instead of continuing on going back to D sharp minor, we actually start going backwards, which I said, you know, again, is perfectly fine. So here we move from F minor to C minor. And something else that's going a bit deeper into it than maybe I should be going, but I'll mention it as well, is that, you know, if you have a track in F minor, kind of like how I briefly mentioned in the first video, a track in F minor might be playing F a lot, since that's its sort of most stable note, quote unquote. And that's exactly what's happening here. That little ringing sound is just playing F. And that's part of what makes the circle of fifths so powerful, is because F fits right in to C minor. So even though we're changing key, that note that it's playing fits perfectly into the new key, so we don't have any problems there. And then we continue going backwards on the circle of fifths, transitioning from C minor to G minor. This is a bit of a longer transition, just letting you guys know. But here we start out in C minor and we end up in G minor. And just like that, we went from C minor to G minor. And again, I think most of these transitions should be pretty smooth with a key, and hopefully good examples of why the circle of fifths is such a powerful tool. And then for the final transition of the mix, I go backwards one more time from G minor to D minor. And I think this is another really good one that highlights how these keys can work together, because I've got the vocal in D minor playing over the instrumental in G minor, and to me at least, they sound perfectly in key. So it's very likely that the vocal in Everything Matters When It Comes to You just doesn't play the note that these two don't have in common. And again, I should make very clear, just because this is your best bet doesn't mean it's always going to work. There are probably many cases where you might try and do this circle of fifths transition and it still sounds out of key, usually because of that one note that they don't share in common. But again, if you're ever worried about that, there should hopefully be plenty of people who are willing to listen and give feedback. So that's all that I wanted to say about key transitions. Now let's talk about BPM transitions. So I'm going to use Ascend once again as my example. And let's say that we want to go from Ascend to, say, Start Again by Muzz. Well, Start Again by Muzz is in the same key, but it's in 160 BPM instead of 150. Now, I could just put Start Again on stretch and change it to 150 BPM using the method that I showed you in the first video. But let's say that I actually just want to straight up change the tempo from 150 to 160. So the first thing that you're going to want to do is, since we're starting off with Ascend and I'm going to have it playing during the tempo transition, we're going to want to put it on stretch. we don't need to type in the BPM because the BPM is already set to 150. But if it was not set to 150, then go ahead and type it in. The reason why we want to put this on stretch mode is because when we are doing a tempo automation, if it's on resample mode, it's not going to stay synced during the tempo automation. You need to have it on stretch mode so that it stays in time throughout the entire tempo automation. Now let's go ahead and let's create a tempo automation. Now, if you were to right click this and click create automation clip, it would create an automation clip through the whole project. So to avoid that little bit of frustration, select the area where you want to create the automation clip first, and then right click and hit create automation clip. And a little pointer for those of you guys using FL, these little dots beneath the letters, if you just hit that letter on your keyboard and you have this turned off, I can just hit A on my keyboard and there it is. Now, if you want to type in the BPM, you'll see that this is only set to percentages. So if I type in 160, it's just going to go to the max. So what you're going to want to do is right click here, type 160 in here, right click, hit C or copy, and then here hit V or paste. And now it's going to go from 150 to 160. Now if I want, I can just find where the drop of start again is. And you're going to want to find the drop in this 160 section, because see how the length of it changed when I went from 150 to 160? If I found the drop here at 150, it's going to desync after the tempo automation. So I'm going to want to find it as the project's BPM is at 160. And the other thing that I want you to notice is, notice that when I disable this tempo, the BPM goes back to 150. So this needs to be enabled. What I like to do to prevent me from accidentally disabling it if I'm like soloing this, right clicking to solo, is if you shift click this green button, you see that lock symbol comes up, and now no matter what I right click to solo, it's going to stay on. So then you don't have that problem anymore. Just another tip for the FL Studio users again. So now let's find the drop. And here it is. And we want this to end at this part here. So let's go and extend the automation clip. And now if you hit C on your keyboard, it pulls up the cut tool. If you hold shift, it'll create a vertical line, unlike without it where it's just kind of going wherever, right? But when you have shift, it's always going to be vertical. And then just shift left click, and boom, you've created a cut. If you do shift right click, it automatically deletes whichever section is shorter. So shift left click, right click to delete, and boom, now we have our awesome transition. The other thing that I want to talk about really quickly first is if you put this tempo automation clip to the max, you see that it only goes to 180. And there are plenty of tracks on Monstercat that go beyond 180. And maybe you want to go from, say, a track that's in 180 BPM to a track that's in 100 BPM. But instead of going from 180 down to 100, you go 180 up to 200. Well, you wouldn't be able to do that with this maximum. But luckily, there's a very simple fix. Double click this tempo, and you should see something like this pop up. And then under this max, maybe type in whatever value you want to be the max. You don't have to, but that's what I do. Let's say I want the max to be 250. Again, right click, copy, and then right click, paste. And now, when I drag this to the max, it goes to 150. But now, since I changed the max, this previous automation clip that I made is now messed up. So let's just fix that real quick. 150, copy, paste. 160, copy, paste. So now this is here properly, and when I put this up, it goes up to 250. But the nice thing about this is that if you make your tempo automation clip unique by right-clicking and hit Make Unique, then if you change the maximum for that automation clip, it's not going to affect any of the other automation clips. So if you're like 10 minutes into your mix and you're like, dang, I want to go past 180, but I'm going to have to fix all of these automation clips, just make that one unique, and you can change the maximum of just that automation clip without having to redo your other ones. This is a good opportunity for me to talk about volume automation. So again, let's select the area that we want to automate, which is just right click and drag. And now here, we can use this volume knob to automate. We can also link it to a mixer track through here and maybe pull up something like Fruity Balance and then use this to automate, right click and create an automation clip. Either of those work. There's even, if you hit this wrench, there's another volume tool in here that you can use to automate. If you wanted, you can right click this to automate, but I don't recommend using that because I just like to have these faders to adjust the whole signal whenever I want without me having to worry about it being messed up from automation clips. So you have quite a few volume knobs that you can work with. I'm just going to use Fruity Balance personally, but you can use whatever you want. So I'm linking this to here. I'm going to call it Ascend, and you can just right click and hit R for renaming it. This one I'm going to call Start Again, and I'm going to give this one a Fruity Balance as well. And then here we go ahead, volume knob, right click, create automation clip, and then we'll do one more for Start Again. And now here we can go ahead and just create maybe a simple automation clip like this. Maybe I think that this Start Again comes in too loud, so I want to right click here, do like 0.7 for example, and then see if the volumes match up a bit more nicely there. You know, still could definitely use some polishing, but it's a lot better than what we had just a few moments ago. Now, before we move on, I want to talk about some other extremely useful automation clip techniques, which these are mostly just going to apply to FL users. If people from other DAWs are watching, you might not be able to pull as much from these, but for the FL users, this is a big lifesaver. So let's say that I've got this going to a very important value like 0.5. Well, now that I click and drag this, if I want this to be longer, it's not at 0.5 anymore. I have to hit T and type in 0.5 again. But if you hold Shift, it locks to that value. See, I'm moving my cursor up and down, but it's staying at 0.5. So that's extremely useful. Another extremely useful thing, not only can you copy and paste points, but you can copy and paste entire automation clips. So if I right click here, go into Articulator Tools, copy state, or just hit C, and then I do the same thing. Here, while paste is V for the other ones, this one paste is actually P. I don't know why. But boom, now these two have the exact same automation clip. And you can probably already see why this is extremely useful if you have like some sort of complex automation clip or even a simple one that you just want to apply to a bunch of different tracks. Being able to copy and paste automation clips like this is absolutely a lifesaver. Now let's do some other example. Maybe not even a drop switch, but maybe like in the intro. And maybe I want it that by this point, I want to be in the next track. So let's see, what track should I transition to? Let's make this simple and choose one that's in the same key and BPM. Let's do Fall by Vest Green and Blaso, one of the more recent tracks on the label. So now let's drag this one in. Then maybe at this point we go into the build-up of Fall. Let's find where that is. So now if we play them on top of each other.
Call me
So first of all, let's just run a little bit of volume automation. Let's put fall where start again used to be. That way we can just go ahead and use this fruity balance. Now this next thing, I know Rocket Man has talked about this a lot in his Learn to Mix streams. Keeping in mind the frequency content of the track, you know, how much low end there is, how much high end there is. And what's really nice about FL Studio is that, you know, maybe your speakers don't even play low end that well, but you can see it visually using this. It's by default on the oscilloscope, but you can change it to the spectrogram, and then you can get this kind of layout. And you can see the low end down here. And if we go on to fall, you can see there's definitely low end here as well. Now, low ends especially tend to be the most sensitive part of the frequency spectrum. So if you have two of those playing at the same time, things can get out of hand really easily. Though it is also to an extent the same with high ends. For the transitions, you're going to want to make sure that you're keeping in mind your high ends. But right off the bat, we definitely don't want to have both of these low ends playing at the same time. So here's where we're going to want to bring out the EQ and do some automation with that. So first, let's go into a Sends mixer track. I'm going to go ahead and drop in Fruity Parametric EQ. And you know, there are a few options. You can do this filter type, and I'll go ahead and do that for this one. You can change the bandwidth and the order up here. There are quite a few options for you to play around with. I'll probably go with this for now. Don't forget, select the area that you want to automate. Then right click the frequency, click A to create the automation clip, and boom, here we go. What I like to do personally, just to keep things in order, is I like to group the automation clips under their respective tracks. So I just hit G and it makes a little group like that. That way if I hit Alt right click, it solos all of the tracks in the group together. But that's just a little bit of an FL organization tip. That's not going to change the way that the mix sounds or anything. So let's say I bring this up to maybe 0.4, do a little bit of a curve like this, and we can hear and see visually what it does. We leave the lows very much intact in this first bit, but then we start taking them off. So then we're going to want to do the opposite for fall. We're going to want to start with the lows out and then bring them in. So again, let's just select this area. Let's go to its mixer track, add in the EQ, and maybe we'll do a similar shape. But here we start with it high. Maybe we start it with, maybe not that high, but maybe around here. And then we keep it high, as in we keep the lows minimized and removed for the good first portion of this, but then we can bring it in here towards the end, something like this.
Call me up when you're sober, when you shout and change. You give it up like it's over, but never give it away. And I don't wanna fall.
So notice how we're bringing that in, and now when we play them together,
call me up when you're sober, when you shout and change. You give it up like it's over, but never give it away. And I don't wanna fall.
and I can hear and see kind of visually that during this section, both of their lows are kind of being tamed, so there's not much, we're losing a bit of low end there. So I'm gonna bring Fall's low end back a little bit more quickly and then kind of fix that problem.
Call me up when you're sober. When you shout and change, you give it up like it's over, but never give it away. And I don't wanna fall.
There we go. Now we fix that low end problem, but there's still one other glaring problem, I would say, with this transition, which is that you can kind of tell that Ascend just cuts off.
Never give it away. And I don't wanna fall for you.
So this is where keeping the high ends in check might be useful. Maybe we want to bring out the high ends, or bring down the high ends, I should say, of Ascend as we end this transition. So again, let's go ahead back into Ascend. And maybe instead of using the low pass filter type, I decide to just use a high shelf and sort of bring it down like this. Maybe something like this. So let's reset this, and instead of automating the frequency, I'm going to automate this level here. So reset, and I've already got the area selected, so right click, A, and there we go. And then maybe I'll just do something like this and hear how it sounds. And maybe just to fully kind of transition out of Ascend, we do a volume automation as well. Maybe we don't want to bring it down to 0, but we do bring it down. Maybe I do a more subtle dip to maybe 0.7 here, maybe 0.65 even. If you right click this, this will reset the curvature, so I'll right click for that. And maybe we don't bring it down as quiet, maybe we only bring it down to like 0.5. Smooth out the curve there. And now let's hear how it sounds with everything else.
Call me up when you're sober. When you shout and change, you give it up like it's over, but never give it away. And I don't wanna fall for you this time.
And hear how clean that sounds, right? So even with just a little bit of volume automation and, you know, really taking care of our highs and our lows, you're able to clean up a transition so much more. And of course, I should mention again, track selection played a part in this too though, because both these tracks are kind of dramatic, same key, same BPM, so we had to do less work to make it so smooth, but we still definitely contributed. Someone else trying to do the same transition, just smacking the two tracks on top of each other, you're going to hear the difference. But there are other things that we can do, other transition techniques that I'm going to talk about right now. Like so far we've talked about volume and EQ, but reverb is also a very useful transitioning tool. You know, maybe we can make this even smoother by, instead of making Ascend go down so much in volume, you know, maybe 0.6 here, 0.7 here. Maybe we can make it even cleaner by having it reverb out. So let's go ahead again, select our area. And usually I don't use the stock reverb. I personally prefer, you know, Kilohertz Reverb and Valhalla Supermassive, which is free, third party. But just to keep things stock, I'll go ahead and use the normal free reverb here. So we can go ahead. I'm not going to really talk about what all these knobs do. you know, you can check the manual, and I'm sure that there's plenty of other tutorials that will help kind of explain that. But let's go ahead and make 2 automation clips here. Let's make one for the dry amount and one for the wet amount. So we'll set this to 100% and then automate the dry level and the wet. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to have the wet going up and the dry going down. Something like this so that it only really comes out at the very end. And maybe we don't even want it going to 100%. Maybe only something like this. And let's hear how this sounds. And you know, maybe I'm thinking it gets too quiet. Maybe I keep this at 0.8, only have this go down to 0.7. Maybe I bring the wet level a little bit higher. And maybe I mess with some of the reverb settings as well, just to kind of really get it sounding how I'd like. And also something else that's worth noting is if I put the reverb before the EQ, if I change the order, if I have this here, the reverb goes before the EQ, whereas here we EQ the signal first and then put reverb on it. And sometimes that can make a difference. So feel free to kind of mess around with the order of effects as well, because that might also affect the results that you get. And here I just kind of adjusted some of these automation clips a bit by ear, and let's hear how it sounds.
Call me up when you're sober, when you try to change. You give it up like it's over, but never give it away. And I don't wanna fall for you this time.
And again, you know, by using that reverb on ascend, we can have it sort of fade out much more naturally and again, just further smoothen this transition. Another thing that you can use to kind of improve and smooth out your transitions is effects, and I know Rocket Man had talked about this as well. I mean, I know that there are a few that I personally really like, such as this exhaust from Cashmere, and also something again for these FL Studio users. If you select this, just click and drag, and then hold Shift and click and drag again. And if you right click these tracks, go into size or hit S, go into 50% or hit up arrow. Now when you hit enter, all of these automation clips, you can have full control of their size. You know, you can make them even smaller if you'd like, but I personally am a fan of the 50%. And then you can just kind of make the workspace a lot cleaner, where all these automation clips aren't cluttering up your view. And another nice thing with the groups is that you can just kind of collapse them all together if you know that you're done touching them, and it makes everything look so much cleaner. So anyways, back to effects. Like I said, I like this Cashmere exhaust one a lot. So maybe I want to take off the attack. I just hit S there. S switches to the slip thing. P switches to the pen. I'm just hitting this on the keyboard. Then if you hit S, if you do this, it only snaps to the grid, but if you hit Alt, it doesn't snap to the grid anymore, so you can change, you know, the exact amount that you want. So let's say I just get rid of that attack there. Maybe I want to even pull it back a bit more. And now maybe something like that in the background will help the transition even more. So here's without.
Call me up when you're sober.
And then here's with.
Call me up when you're sober. When you shine and change.
And using these effects, even though they're not Monstercat tracks, these effects are perfectly legal. So feel free to use them without any problem. And maybe I also want another impact here, just to give this transition a bit more oomph.
And I don't wanna fall for you.
Another one that I really like is this Cashmere Sweep Down 10. But as you can imagine, it's pretty loud right now, so let's turn that down, maybe put it at 0.6 or even 0.5. And maybe I want to throw in the exhaust there as well. And then without.
Give it away. And I don't wanna fall for you.
And then with.
Give it away. And I don't wanna fall for you.
So again, you know, all of these things coming together, the volume automations, the track selection, the EQ, the reverb, the effects, just further smoothing out this transition.
Call me up when you're sober. When you shine and change. You give it up like it's over, but never give it away. And I don't wanna fall for you this time.
And being able to have smooth transitions like these and putting in the extra work to make them really seamless is going to benefit you greatly in something like the mix contest. Because even though I feel like what most finalists, if not all finalists, do to stand out is through their mashups, that doesn't mean that the judges aren't looking at the transitions. They definitely care about the transitions, and if they see that you put extra work into the transitions, or if they see that you didn't put extra work into the transitions, that's definitely going to make a difference. So all of these things, you know, the EQ, the reverb, the effects, it takes a little bit of extra time, but it's nothing crazy, and it can definitely make a big difference. It might be enough to kind of set you apart in that regard. The last thing that I want to talk about in terms of transition techniques in this video is something called reverse reverb. I don't know if it would work well necessarily in this specific example, but I'll just do it with a bit of fall just to show you how it works. So let's say I have this section and I want to transition into it. So this is where reverse reverb comes in. There are two different ways to do it. One is faster, but you get a little bit less control, and the second one is slower, but you get more control. So if we head over to fall, let's just go ahead and add a reverb, and I'll do the fruity reverb again just to keep things stock. And what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to have it all wet, so reset the wet and turn the dry down to 0. And then of course you can mess around with these knobs and have it however way you think will sound the best. So once you've got that set up, you're going to want to open up Edison and just get a little snippet, like play this just for a moment or two, and then stop it and have Edison record it. So let's turn the recording on in Edison, and we'll just hit play and hit stop really quickly after. And we'll let it ring out. And here, we can normalize it, and now you see that it's kind of got the whole tail in here. And now, if we hit Alt left arrow, that'll reverse the audio. And now we've got a reverse reverb. Something that I like to do to make it a little bit smoother is I like to put reverb on the reverse reverb. We're going to want to turn it off on the main fall, but we're going to want to put reverb on the reverse reverb, just because without it, you hear how in here it just kind of ends. If we put reverb on it, that'll allow us to smooth it out a lot more and it not to end so abruptly. So let's just put a little bit of the fruity reverb here. So before, it just kind of comes in like this. But with the reverse reverb, you can see it comes in a lot more smoothly. And of course, we can sort of dial these settings in to get it sounding exactly like how we want. So that's the first way to do it. And you can hopefully see how it's very useful for if something's just cutting in immediately, or if you have a vocal that you want to kind of swell in, the reverse reverb is going to be very useful for that and getting that transition a lot smoother. Then the second method is we go back into Fall and we open up Edison and we just play a little clip. Just like that, that's all we need. And then we hit Control R for the reverb. And you should see something like this. Make sure you have the dry to 0 and the wet to max. And what this does is it doesn't do your traditional reverb. This does convolution reverb. You can go into this impulse and you can change this out if you want. And then we just hit accept. Alt left. And boom. There you go. You still have to put the reverb on top of it so that it's not as abrupt. But, you know, since it's just all kind of keyboard shortcuts, you can do this really quick. And boom, you know, in just a second you have your reverse reverb. But again, since it's using convolution reverb, you can either make your own impulses and whatnot, but I feel like people are more familiar with the Fruity Reverb 2. So that's why I'm saying it gives you a little bit less control, but it is definitely faster. So you can just maybe find an impulse you like and do it this way, or you can use the other method if you want. And then again, as you might imagine, we just drag this in here. Maybe link it to the reverse. Bring this automation clip back in here. So again, it's super smooth because the reverb is tailored exactly to the sound. So when you bring it in, it's almost like you're just fading in the sound. So it allows you to extend it a little bit and get some really smooth transitions out of that. Okay, so yeah, I think that's everything that I wanted to talk about in terms of the transition tips for this video. There are some other transition tips that I know that I'm wanting to talk about, but since those are a lot less general, like a lot less widely applicable, unlike these, I'm gonna save them for the 7th video and talk about them then. So since I was talking about transition techniques for this video, then for the next video I'm gonna be talking about mashup techniques. And again, if it shows up as unavailable in this end card, it should be going up tomorrow. I think that's about it. So take care, guys, and I'll be seeing you.